Well, it's Wednesday morning about 8:45 and I finished breakfast and heading off for a day of sightseeing on my own. Jill's going to stay back and get a load of washing done, do a few other bits and pieces around the place and have a bit of a relax. So I'm going to look at some Old Testament sites, predominantly Old Testament sites today. I've just been in the car about 15 minutes and headed down the east coast of the Sea of Galilee, and at the bottom I've turned south and I'm heading towards the Jordanian border. Not going to go quite that far, but my first stop is the ruins of Beth Shean, or Beth Shan as it's called in the Bible. Now Beth Shan was a significant town in the period of the kings, particularly the period of David and Saul. It was a Philistine outpost, so a long way from Philistine territory. The Philistine territory was predominantly on the coast, way down south of Tel Aviv, where we were yesterday, so sort of down towards the Egyptian border on the Mediterranean coastline. But the Philistines did have outposts all scattered all over the region, and Beth Shan was one of those. It was a city that was under Philistine control, not far from Israelite territory, surrounded by Israelite territory in fact, and it was here that the bodies of Saul and Jonathan were taken by the Philistines when they were killed on Mount Gilboa. Now, Mount Gilboa is my second visit, just nearby, and it overlooks the Jezreel Valley, and it was a place where Saul and Jonathan and the Israelite army went to war with the Philistines. It's recorded towards the pretty much right at the end of the book of 1 Samuel, and the 2nd Samuel begins with David writing a lament about the death of Saul and Jonathan, and he talks about the mountains of Gilboa in that lament. And so their bodies were taken to Beth Shan and put on public display there to kind of celebrate, I guess, the victory that the Philistines had over the Israelites that day. But the scriptures record that some valiant men came, fought their way into Beth Shan and took the bodies of their king and their prince back into Israelite territory and gave them a proper burial. So I believe there's some quite significant ruins at Beth Shan. There's all kinds of pillars and different things, so we'll wait and see what I'm going to learn when I get there. But from there I'm going to head over to Mount Gilboa, which is nearby, and then over to Tel Megiddo. Megiddo is the end of the world, literally. That's Armageddon, the place that the Bible refers to. In fact, Jews, Christians, and Muslims all have reference to the Battle of Armageddon in some form or other, being the end of the world, the great battle. And so it's a significant place, Megiddo. I'll tell you more about that when I get there. But it's easy to see why it's a significant battlefront and was throughout history, being a very important location for battle, geographically vital importance. My plan from there is to head to the opposite end, back towards where we came yesterday, back towards Haifa, and head up Mount Carmel to where there is a Carmelite monastery. The Carmelite nuns began there, and it's here that they honour where Elijah defeated the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel by calling down fire from heaven and calling and breaking the drought, praying that God would break 3 years of drought. And so it's quite a significant spot in Old Testament history. And from Mount Carmel, I will head across the north side of the valley to Nazareth. Obviously, we know Nazareth well. It's the place where Jesus grew up and spent his formative years. And today, though, it's significant because it's actually an Arab town within Israelite territory. So we drove past Nazareth yesterday and it looked very Arabic. And so we'll take a drive in there. There is like a theme park experience in there called the Nazareth Experience, where they've created some space where you can go back and view Nazareth as it was, with buildings and houses and farms and all that sort of stuff like it was in New Testament days. I won't do that today. We'll try and fit that in another day with Jill. So after I've finished at Nazareth, I'll take a trip up Mount Tabor. Mount Tabor is the mountain that is often referred to as the Mount of Transfiguration, where Jesus was transfigured. A lot of people believe that's the place he was. It also has significance in the Old Testament, and from that I'll head back to En Gev, and we'll probably have some dinner. One of the fascinating contrasts about this country is there's so much diversity in the landscape, and water is obviously paramount for living, and water is in short supply. They say in Israel that half the country is dry all the time and half the country is dry half the time, and so it does affect where people can live and so on. And I'm noticing as I drive around just how dry this place really is. In many ways, it reminds me of Canberra. Now, especially as I drive through the Jezreel Valley, as I am right now, there is lots of hills all around and then lots of valleys. So it's very similar to Canberra's landscape, but also dry like Canberra. Canberra is known to be a lot drier than Sydney in the time I've lived there. The grass on the side of the road looks like it could go up in a bushfire at any time. The hills are brown, not green, and then every now and then you see a pocket where the land is either irrigated or maybe there's a spring, and they actually turn that straight away into harvestable land, and there's plots of trees or crops there, and then no sooner does that finish, it just simply goes back to being dry and barren again. Behind me are the ruins of ancient Beth Shan. Now, down there on the ground is the Roman city that would have been built around about the time of Christ or thereabouts. And I'm actually standing up on top of a hill. Now, this hill is a tell. A tell is actually a man-made hill. When a city was conquered in ancient times, they didn't have the ability to sort of remove the rubble, so they would just put soil down and build over the top of the old city. Now, that proposes an interesting challenge, but also a great minefield of potential historical information for archaeologists. And in fact, this is a live archaeological dig as I speak. Many others around Israel are too. So what they do is they drill down carefully through the layers of this tell, and they extract implements and pottery and all kinds of things from different levels, and that gives them an understanding of the history. Now, somewhere below me would have been the ruins of the ancient city of the Philistine city of Beth Shan, where King Saul and his son Jonathan, Prince Jonathan, were carried in their bodies, put on public display by the Philistines to celebrate their victory over Israel. But since then, layers upon layers have come. King David actually conquered this city when he became king, and he burned it to the ground, probably in response to what they did to King Saul, I would assume. Now, it's interesting that down on the ground there, the Romans didn't bother about building on top of the tell. It's just a show of their confidence in their strength, I suppose, because these tells, as well as being easier to build upon, actually provided a sense of security, as it obviously gave the people in the city the high ground against anyone who might want to attack. But down there, the Romans didn't worry about that. The sheer strength of their force meant that they would build a city anywhere. In fact, on top of the tell, the only Roman thing up here is the remains of a Roman temple, which is quite a common thing to pronounce over the landscape of Judea and Palestine area, that the Romans were in charge of this place. So there would have been a great temple up here. At the far end of the central colonnade there is an amphitheatre. Now, that would have been where shows were taking place. It's much smaller than the amphitheatre at Caesarea, but as you can see, it's still a wonderful looking building. Would have been a great atmosphere to come there and watch a show. I'm standing in Palladius Street, which would have been the main centre of town in the Roman period. It's probably not the place where Saul and Jonathan were buried or were put on display. That's probably hidden under that mountain somewhere in some of the earlier parts of town. But this was the Roman main street in that period, and this giant marble columns. These marbles would have been imported from Rome most likely, and it's pure marble. It's not just cheap stone. Very much similar to look at the marble that exists in the Palais Garnier in Paris that I saw, although obviously that's polished. This has been left to the weather and so on. But this main street would have been very impressive. These columns would have had roofs right along both sides of the street. It was a main shopping area, a main celebration area, public parades and so on. And up there in the distance is Tel Beth Shan, which is a mountain that has layers upon layers upon layers of history in it. Well, I've just left Beth Shan and heading up towards the mountains of Mount Gilboa, which are actually right in front of me there. And you can see that this side in particular is very dry. And in 2 Samuel chapter 21, David actually cursed the mountains of Gilboa. That's where Saul and Jonathan had been killed by the Philistines. They'd been fighting down in the valley to our right, the Jezreel Valley, and they retreated up the hill for a place of safety, but the Philistines pursued them and killed Saul and his men on the top of the mountain. And David cursed the mountains of Gilboa and said, may they never see dew or rain again. And it would appear that they haven't seen a lot of rain. They seem very dry, especially on this side of the mountain, which is the Beth Shan side. over to the other side. You probably can't see it, but over on the top of the hill, I feel like I'm back in the UK. There's actually a windmill farm up there with about a dozen or so windmills. I saw those all over the UK. I don't know how many there would be across the UK from north to south. There would have to be tens of thousands of windmills, but that's the first I've seen of them in Israel. Well, I'm about 15 to 20 minutes drive up the hill from Beth Shan, and about a third of the way up, or a quarter of the way up the hill, I passed a sign that said sea level. The valley down below is about 60 or 70 meters below sea level. I'm currently over 200 meters above sea level, so a good way up here. 250 plus meters over the valley floors below. There's two valleys. This is a strategic hill. This is the hill where Saul and Jonathan were killed when the Israelites fled from the Philistines. And over to my right, there's a valley down there, which is the Beth Shan Valley. And then down beyond that is the Jordan River Valley. And the hills that you can just make out maybe in the distance, it's quite hazy today, is actually the Trans-Jordan region. That's the mountains on the other side of the Jordan River in modern day Jordan, but was originally in a region that belonged to Israel in biblical times. As I swing around the other way, over behind me, up the back in the haze, very hazy out over the ocean today, Mount Carmel is up that way somewhere. I'll be heading over there shortly. And down below me in the valley floor, right at my feet, is the Jezreel Valley. Now that is a very, very common, popular valley, mentioned a lot in the Bible. It's a significant valley. A lot of farming goes on still to this day there. Lots of history in that place. A lot of biblical events took place in the Jezreel Valley. And it's a large expanse that starts over near Haifa, Mount Carmel near the ocean, and goes all the way, basically all the way to the Sea of Galilee. And that's my trip today, is sort of to circumnavigate the Jezreel Valley. There are various different settlements around the place. It's hard to work out exactly what they are. GPS doesn't always give you accurate direction on Google Maps, but I've managed to work out that I am heading back over that way. To next stop is Megiddo. Tel Megiddo, the place of the end of the world, Armageddon. And there's a giant tell there. I don't know how much time I'm going to spend on that tell. Pretty exhausted after the heat just at Beth Shan, but we'll go and have a look at that now. So further to my last post, I'm pretty sure that the settlements just nearby behind me that I couldn't tell what they were are actually sort of southeast of Mount Gilboa, and they're probably inside the West Bank. So they are Palestinian settlements inside the northern part of the West Bank. So Jerusalem is that way, and this area here was part of ancient Samaria, or ancient Israel, the northern kingdom, where the Samaritans lived in the time of Jesus. So just in the distance, possibly even just there's a couple of mountains up there, possibly over there is Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, two adjoining mountains. I was hoping to be able to go there, but not going to get inside the West Bank on this trip. But they are significant mountains. That's where the Israelites first conquered and sort of settled in the Promised Land. Abraham, Isaac and Jacob all went through there on their journeys, and it's on Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal over there where Joshua called the Israelites together at the end of his life and chose those famous words, "Choose for yourself whom you will serve, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." And flies are bad. It is hot up here, and yes, I did buy a new hat. I bought that at Beth Shan, a gift shop. I had to look like a local traveling on my own, and thought, what could I do to make myself look more local than to buy an archaeologist's hat? So I'm kind of feeling a bit like Indiana Jones. So as I'm making my way back down the other side of Mount Gilboa, I saw a sign that said Mount Shawl, and I thought to myself, and I have to do some research, I'm thinking that sounds awfully like Mount Saul, and it's sort of probably much lower down in the valley than we were before, probably halfway down the mountain. The valley is behind me there, and it's quite possible this was the place where they think Saul was killed. As I look at it, it would have been a much easier retreat up here and not quite so remote. It's such a significant way down the hill. So I have to do some research. So don't take my word for it. I may be wrong, but there is a wall here saying development and recreation of Mount Shawl in Gilboa mountain range was made possible by all these various sponsors, including obviously someone who wanted to stake the Canadian flag for all our Canadian friends and whack a maple leaf on there. So I'm not really sure. I have to do some more research, but I can get a clearer picture from here. I'm heading that way, is over the direction I'm going now, across towards the ocean, and I get a clearer picture of the mountain range there, which is probably Mount Carmel. As I head westward along the floor of the Jezreel Valley towards Tel Megiddo, one thing I've noticed is that the traffic is a lot busier. There is a lot more construction, a lot more people living, cities, towns, settlements around this part of the valley as closer to the ocean than there is in Galilee area, which is quite different to how I think it would have been in Bible days, where water was in short supply and people tended to, as much as the climate was probably more pleasant down here on the coastal plain, they would have been more challenging to get water, so they tended to live in the foothills of the mountain range, where they could get springs and rivers and runoff from rain and so on. But obviously with modern technology, sewage and pumping water and irrigation and so on, they've been able to move their settlements down onto the valley, more westward towards the coast, probably geographically easier to build with mountains, less mountains, and also too, I guess, probably just the climate was a lot better. It would have been warmer, milder in winter and cooler in summer, a bit like living sort of on the coast in Sydney as opposed to living out in the west. This is me driving the right hand side of the road, yep, in the slow lane. I find myself driving the left hand side of the road subconsciously a few times, and then I look behind me and there's a queue of traffic, people trying to get past. They don't seem to take much notice of speed limits in this place. But I've got about 3 cars in front of me, and a truck behind me. So after this one, I might speed up a little too. Something's going on up ahead, slowing me down. So let's jump lanes. Just someone out for a Wednesday drive, taking their time. Back over in front of him. There's our friend behind in the silver car, slowing everybody down. Well, it turns out Australia is not the end of the world. No, this is the end of the world. I'm standing in the visitors centre for Tel Megiddo, otherwise known as Armageddon. And it turns out that it's a very popular place. There's busloads of tourists who've come to enjoy the end of the world, to watch the end of the world. They've even got a gift shop, a massive gift shop. So the end of the world is a thriving business, and I assume that there'll be people buying and selling, as Jesus said, right up until the end of time. You can buy end of the world jewelry, you can buy end of the world books. It's incredible. It's a thriving business. I'm going to go for a walk on site now. Well, I'm standing in the first of the entranceways to Tel Megiddo, and behind me is the gateway, which a lot of people believe is the original gateway that Solomon built. Now, I'm hoping that later on in the journey I'll be able to get a clearer picture of one of Solomon's gates, but just in case, I'll record something here. They're not entirely sure whether this gate is Solomon's gate or Ahab's gate, because this one it appears to have 4 chambers, not 6. But the scriptures tell us that Solomon built 6 chambered gates at Megiddo, and I think a couple of other towns escape my mind at the moment, but he built 6 chambered gates, and they've found evidence of this. These gates were had little rooms off the main entrance into the city where I guess soldiers could do their work or something like that. But as I was taking my phone out of my pocket, I had a £1 coin. Don't ask me what it was still doing in my shorts, but it was. I had a £1 coin from the UK sitting in my pocket, and I pulled out my phone and it came out too and rolled down into a crack among some rocks down here, and I can't get it out again. So one day some archaeologists are going to come along and be completely blown away as he's excavating 1,000 years BC, and he finds a £1 coin lodged in amongst the rocks. Well, I'm standing on top of Tel Megiddo. This is otherwise known as Armageddon, and it is probably, arguably, one of the most strategic places on the whole planet. There is 7,000 years of civilization. Like this, basically, this Tel dates back to the beginning of time, the beginning of civilization. They say there are 25 levels of civilization under my feet right now. And every time this city has been conquered, 25 times, it's been rebuilt. It was last inhabited in about 400 BC, so around about the time that the exiles came back, and it's not been inhabited since then. But the scriptures talk a lot about it. The Islamic Quran talks about it. There's a lot of belief that this is the place where the final battle will take place between Jesus and his enemies on this very spot. Now, why is this spot so symbolic or so important? Well, if you have a look at a map, and if you're interested in any way in geography, the reason you'll see that it's important is it actually guards the main route, the main trade route between significant major continents. So as I swing around, we're going to see, I'm just trying to find out where my direction is. We're going to see that as we head up into the hills, it must actually be just up there. There's our hills. If you head up into the hills there, that is heading towards the coastal plain of Israel. And if you continue down that road through Israel, down into Egypt, and ultimately into Africa. And that's looking down towards the southwest. As we look up to the northwest, we head up to the northern part of Israel, beyond Lebanon, around the Mediterranean into Europe. And as we look over towards our east, we actually head out into the Arabian desert and into India and Asia. And this particular route right through here was the central point for everybody traveling between any of those three continents, which is a huge, massive part of the whole world. And so anybody who owned this city, who habitated this city, actually guarded the entryway and could stop trade routes, and basically had incredible power and opportunity for wealth. They could tax people traveling through and so on. And so we have records of this city in writing named as Megiddo from about 1500 BC, when the Egyptian Emperor Pharaoh Thutmose wrote that he had conquered this city, 1500 BC. About 1000 BC, during the time of the kings of Israel, Solomon conquered this city and turned it in, obviously for obvious reasons, being its significant, strategic, important area. He conquered it and built a significant fortress here, put his chariot horses here, massive stables that he built. You can read about that in scripture. It was one of the reasons that Solomon fell, as he didn't trust God, and he relied upon horses, and he tried to have a treaty with Egypt, and he tried to marry foreign women. There's three things that God told him not to do in the scriptures, and he did every one of those. And so he had a huge fortress here with protection, and then it was conquered by various different people who conquered the Holy Land after that. And there is history, so much history here. The thing about a Tel, though, is that they can only really be very limited in what they can find, because this is a massive building structure here that this city was sitting on. And obviously, for structural reasons, they can't just start digging wildly through the layers. So what they do is they kind of drill in a section. It's like a piece of pie, and they drill down and they pull stuff out, extract stuff from the 25 layers. But the problem with that, of course, is that you can only really get to see something that's in one area. There could be other treasures yet unturned over on the other side of the Tel, and they may not ever get to see those things. So it's a very fine science. There's a lot of guesswork, a lot of hope, luck, I suppose, into your mining in the right area when you're looking for things. So it is a very, very fine and slow science. It's not something that you just rush into when you are excavating an archaeological dig like Tel Megiddo. I'm standing near the passageway that descends down into the valley floor below the Tel, where there is a spring of water. Now, water was always challenging to get to cities in ancient days, and in peacetime they would have a water gate usually, which was a gate outside the city walls, a small gate that people could come in and out of when they wanted to get water. You'll see these in Jerusalem. We saw these in Urquhart Castle in the UK. A very common thing to have a water gate. But the problem with a water gate was that during times of siege, obviously, when the city was surrounded by enemies, they couldn't get out to access water. So here at Megiddo, what they did was they built a tunnel. It goes down about 80 meters. I believe, and we're about to walk down there, and then goes about 40 meters outside the city wall, and they concealed an entrance to the spring out there so that they could actually go and access water without those around them knowing that was besieging them, knowing they were accessing water. Now, my timing so far to come to Tel Megiddo was perfect. There was a big tour bus that was sitting in the entryway that came in obviously probably 15-20 minutes before I did, with about 100 people, 100 American people in there, and they were obviously watching some kind of introductory video on their tour, and I've been able to sort of skip them up until this point. However, I'm about to descend into the tunnel, and when I started this video the last of them was there, so my guess is that I'm probably going to have about 200 American tourists sitting in front of me, so I may have to take my time as I go through the tunnel, but hopefully I'll come out the other side and I'll be able to jump ahead of them and head on to my next destination. I'm down in this tunnel section now, and incredible. Always amazes me how people can dig these tunnels so well in biblical days, in ancient times, just with a pick and shovel. There's a great tunnel in Jerusalem, Hezekiah's tunnel, that's 700 meters long, a lot bigger than this one that was dug the same. And so this was their access point for water, and they descended down a whole stack of stairs and obviously through here. And the other thing about down here is it's like air conditioning. It's so hot up top. It's got to be 40 degrees up top. And down here, I feel like cool breeze coming through. It actually feels like it's air conditioned. I could be standing under an air conditioner. It's got to be 20 degrees down here, I reckon. And I'm 80 meters underground, I suppose, but so cool. I'm about to head up the stairs on the other side now. As I've driven around today, I've had a few people ask me who I'm travelling with, and I've just said that my wife and I are on our own. Wife's having the day off in the hotel, and they kind of look at you with a bit of surprise. It would appear that most people, and I guess I already knew that most people do travel around this area with tour buses. I've passed tour buses all day. I can't count how many, probably 50 massive coaches at least, I would think. When I was at Tel Megiddo just then, there were 2 coaches buses ahead of me, and there were another 2 that were arriving just as I was leaving. So I guess the advantage of traveling with a tour company is that maybe they're able to maybe point out, the tour guides are able to point out a few more things than the average person could do if you were traveling on your own. But traveling on your own is becoming a much more popular thing these days with Lonely Planet guides and so on. And I do feel the research that I've done is kind of helping, plus coupled with reading signs and things at sites and pretty much learning enough to keep us going. It's certainly, there's probably extra things that I'll have to learn as I go, but I would say the benefits of doing it on our own, as we're going to do next year with some cars and just driving in tandem.
In 600 meters, slight right onto Route 70.
Thank you, Siri, or Google Maps. I will Yep, that's me looking confused, trying to concentrate on recording a video and also listen to Google Maps, and I think it was 600 meters. I think I did 60 meters, and I'm turning right, so I'm going to have to wait for Siri to tell me to turn around and go back the other way. I don't even know what I'm waiting for here. There's no one to wait for. Back again. It's amazing how recording a video breaks your concentration. So I turned when I should have turned in 600 meters. I turned in 60 meters. So I'm going to go 1.5 kilometers up the road, and hopefully Google Maps will get me to do a U-turn and come back the other way. So where was I? Oh yeah, talking about touring on my own. Well, so there's some advantages of, I would think, of touring on your own. One of those being simply the cost. It's a heck of a lot cheaper than paying for a tour guide. Two, one that I hadn't thought about was
in 600 meters, turn right.
Thank you, Google Maps. The other one that comes to mind is that I can avoid the crowds. When I was in the gift shop, there were crowds of people all waiting to buy their stuff, all waiting to get drinks, all at the cafe together, and obviously they have to stick together. They stick together on site, and then they stick together.
Turn right, then turn right.
For the buses to be there at a certain time. So I've got the advantage, when we're travelling in smaller groups on our own, we've got the advantage of being able to stay away from the crowds and show up at gift shop when you need to when it's quiet, and so on. So I think
Turn right towards Route 722.
Thank you. All in all, I think it's worth touring on your own. I think there's some great advantages to that. I'm enjoying the freedom of being
In
able
400
to
meters,
go
turn
wherever I want.
right.
Not enjoying the freedom of having Google Maps tell us all the time where we need to go, but and again, I did take a wrong turn, so now it's putting me back on the right road. Well, I'm standing on top of the Carmelite Monastery up here on the top of Mount Carmel now, and the same busload of American Christian tourists that were at Tel Megiddo before me, they left just as I did, have just arrived here, which I got lost on the way, took a couple of wrong turns, so it just goes to show that if you know where you're going in a car, it's a lot quicker than a bus. Anyway, the view out here is just quite majestic. I'm looking out over the Jezreel Valley, and I'm sure that the phone won't do anything like the level of quality that I can see with the naked eye, but I can see all the way in the distance up there Mount Hermon right up in the north in the haze. It's probably not visible on the phone. That is the far extreme north where the rain comes down on the mountain and then flows down into the Jordan River, waters the Sea of Galilee and down to the Dead Sea. So that's right up in that side. In the middle, I'm trying to find it on the phone, where's our mountain? I'll take my glasses off. Just in here somewhere, it's not quite clear, is Mount Tabor, which is just behind Nazareth. The town of Nazareth is probably that village right there, according to some signs that are sitting here on the ground. So you can see I've built on the hill there. That is Nazareth. So the Sea of Galilee where we're staying is beyond that, in that direction. And then we head down south, beyond that, the Jordan Valley flows down to the Dead Sea. As I swing around this way, these are all the settlements down here that are settled on the mountaintops of Mount Carmel. Mount Carmel is actually a range of mountains, and because I got lost, I went up all kinds of different alleys and saw lots of different settlements. And as I went further around to the side, you can just make out the ocean. You won't be able to see it on the phone today, but you can just make out the ocean. That is the ocean, the Mediterranean Ocean. So it's on this spot here where Elijah defeated the prophets of Baal. Somewhere right near here, he defeated the prophets of Baal and brought the nation, a large portion of the nation, back to God. And it was here that he sent his servant after 3 years of drought to come up to the top of the mountain, because Elijah must have been down below and he couldn't see the Mediterranean Sea. And he sent his servant up to the top of the mountain and said, reach out and see whether or not the rain is coming. And 7 times he went up and down the mountain, the servant, until he saw a small cloud. And it was at that point that Elijah said, the drought is breaking. And he said to King Ahab, it's time to retreat back to Jezreel. Jezreel was down in the Jezreel Valley there. It was Ahab's capital city, the king's capital city. And Elijah, at that point, after Ahab left in his chariot, the scriptures tell us Elijah, a man just like us, just an ordinary guy, strapped himself in and pulled up his cloak so he wouldn't trip over it, and he ran faster than the chariot, the fastest man that's ever lived, faster than Usain Bolt, ran all the way down to Jezreel and beat him to Jezreel. It was a great story, a great, wonderful story. I'm actually contemplating finding a quiet spot and preaching a sermon from here for church on Sunday. Well, I have driven this little Hyundai, whatever it is, up and down a few hills today. We went up the Mount Gilboa ranges and back down, and then up the Mount Carmel ranges and across them while I got lost and back down. I think it's fair to say this car is built for manoeuvrability, not for power. To be honest, I think a horse has more horsepower than this car does. As I was heading up Mount Carmel on a single lane road for about a 20-minute ascent up the hill, there was a queue of cars queuing behind me, and I literally could not do anything about it. My foot was flat to the floor. There was nowhere to pull over and let them pass. And then I remembered what I thought was an old wives' tale, and that is that if you switch the air conditioning off, you can get more power out of the car. And clearly that's a sign for small cars. I've never had to do that in any car I've driven, but lo and behold, I turned the air conditioning off, and I got just enough power to get me to at least to keep the drivers behind at bay. I just kept them from wanting to get frustrated with me. I had to choose between beeping Jewish drivers and sweltering heat. I chose the latter, and it was pretty hot by the time I got to the top. There was no point in opening windows. It was just fresh air coming in from outside through the vents, and it was hot. So this car does not like traveling up hills. It actually cruises at 100 kilometers an hour at about 3,500 revs. So she's working pretty hard, this little engine. Well, I made it to the top of Mount Tabor with a few minutes to spare before they closed the doors of the churches at 5 p.m. It's been quite a long day, but a very fascinating day. Mount Tabor sits at the northern side of the Jezreel Valley, virtually across the road from Megiddo, where I was earlier today. It's on a diagonal, but it actually is the northern fortress that protected this side of the Jezreel Valley, and Megiddo protected the side on the other. Now, Mount Tabor is commonly believed to be the Mount of Transfiguration, the place where Peter, James and John witnessed Jesus' transfiguration and the appearance of Moses and Elijah to strengthen him. And it's as a result of that, it's been regarded as a holy site, holy Christian site ever since. And there's been multiple churches built on the top of this hill. The Church of Transfiguration is the most elaborate one, I suppose, but even now there are still several churches on the hill. As I was driving up, it's very steep and windy. You would have seen that on the video, the time-lapse video, but I was struck by the fact that from the ground down below in the valley floor, we're about 400 meters above the valley floor here. Apparently the Jezreel Valley floor is about 200 meters above sea level at this point, and we're about 600 meters above sea level, so quite a ways up. There's no tour buses up here. The road is too narrow. People come up in small minibuses, but the coaches can't get up here, so there's nowhere near as many tourists around. And apparently you can walk up here, but I don't think tour guides would be happy. There's 4,600 steps to walk to the top. I reckon it would take about an hour to walk to the top, based on my experience of coming up the mountain in Scotland. It took me an hour and a half to get up that tall mountain there. And that was probably about a similar distance above the valley floor as this, I think. We ascended about 500 meters then. Over behind these trees here, it's sort of, let me change the focus, might be able to make it out, is a range of mountains. That's the Mount Gilboa Mountains on the opposite side where I was first thing this morning. So I've tracked along the south side of the valley and come back along the north side. And just down in the valley between us is Endor, or Endor, as it's known in the Bible. It's the place where Saul found the witch that he asked to bring up Samuel to get a prophetic word about what was going to happen in his life, and he did that the night before he fought the battle on the plains of Jezreel and then escaped up into the hills, only to be killed on the other side of the valley up on Mount Gilboa. Well, I'm back down on the valley floor, Jezreel Valley floor now. I've come down off Mount Tabor up there. What strikes me about this mountain from this perspective down here is that it bears a striking resemblance to another mountain that sounds rather like Mount Tabor. That is Mount Taylor. You Canberrans will know Mount Taylor. I grew up right at the foot of Mount Taylor, and it's very similar to look at. It's about the same height. Similar kind of thing. You can drive up Mount Tabor, you can't drive up Mount Taylor. But even the fact that one side looks like a different vegetation, looks less dense on forest than the other side, it's just incredible, the similarity. And that got me to thinking about the fact that here's a mountain that's, yes, it's a nice mountain, but it's not totally majestic or anything. But just because of where it is located, there is a mountain, Mount Tabor, that virtually everybody who's a Christian knows, because of all that's taken place there. Because it happened to be here, Jesus was transfigured on that mountain. Compare it with Mount Taylor, which nobody knows except people who live in Canberra, and many Canberrans probably don't know very much about it either. Not so much the fact that it is a particular type of mountain, just because of what has happened and the significance of who has set foot on that mountain. And people have built churches and historically thought about that mountain all there for the last thousands of years, all because of what has happened right there on Mount Tabor. I'm descending now down into the Galilee Valley. The lake's not quite in view yet, and yesterday when we first arrived we came down a slightly different path than this one, and it descended beautifully. Our first glimpse of the famed lake was incredible. In the late afternoon sun, the lake just was glistening. Hopefully in a moment you'll be able to see the lake as well. We're just not descending from quite as far up the hill as we were yesterday. Hopefully when we swing around here it should come into view. I think it may actually be just on the other side of that ridge there. Okay, I'm over the other side of that ridge now, and I've got a feeling that the lake will come into view in just a moment. I'm entering into the town of Kinneret, or Kinneret, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but it's the name by which the lake is called today, the Sea of Kinneret, and it's basically...
Exit the roundabout onto Route 767.
And there's the lake.
Continue on Route 767 for 3 kilometres.
There it is. So Kinneret, I'm guessing, is a derivation of the Sea of Gennesaret, which is also the other name it was given during the days of Jesus. The Sea of Galilee, the Sea of Tiberias, the Sea of Kinneret, Gennesaret, that's it. It's a lake, really, not a sea. Freshwater lake. At the north, the water comes in, very fertile, full of fish life, and then the water just down there to our right is where the water goes out and flows on down to the Jordan River into the Dead Sea. But it's very pretty. I actually think this may be the road we came in on yesterday. It looks very similar if it isn't. I'm pretty sure it is. It's a magnificent view. I'll just leave that video running for a moment as we make our way down to the shore. Beautiful, rich, dark blue. Those mountains on the other side are the region of the Gerasenes, where Jesus travelled across the lake to that region somewhere to deliver the man with a legion of demons. He would have been living in the hills up there, in amongst the graves. Now that was the city region of the Decapolis. Mainly Romans lived over there, and so it was not frequented. That side of the lake was not frequented by Jews. They tended to stick to this side of the lake. There were several cities called Decapolis, or 10 cities, and many of them were over on that side of the lake. Very dry and barren. Beyond that is the Golan Heights, which is area that belonged to Syria until 1967. In fact, where we're staying at Engeb is on that side of the lake, and it also was in Syrian hands until the 6-Day War, when it was reclaimed by Israel, and they have a large portion of the land over that side. But beyond that land, about probably 30 or 40 kilometres beyond that land, is the region of Syria, the country of Syria. I'm not sure what these palm plants are. We were trying to work out if they're date palms or if they are banana palms, but they are everywhere around the sea and over on the other side as you drive along the other side as well. I'll have to do some research. They look like banana palms, but I wouldn't have thought the colder climate during the winter would suit bananas in this part of the world. But to see them all here, they're everywhere.
In 500 meters, turn right onto Route 90. Turn right onto Route 90. Continue on Route 90 for 800 meters.
Okay, I'm down on the floor now, heading around the south side of the lake, so there's probably not a lot to see.
In 600 meters, at the roundabout, take the first exit and stay on Route 90.
She's been helpful all day. Not a lot to see here with vegetation on both sides of the lake, but it's just here on the southern tip where Hillsong had their concert just a few weeks ago. There's a water park, theme park, and just to my left, just to our left as we go up here a little bit further. And yes, it was just in the arena next to that they had their concert, right by the shores of the Sea of Galilee. So I'm back inside our accommodation now. That's the end of today's expedition of the Jezreel Valley. It's quite a nice little community here. nice little apartments with nice views of the lake, and I'm just waiting for Pastor John Thomas, pilgrimage to the Holy Land, June 21 to July 3, 2017 it says. He was reversing in there yesterday as I was driving back, and here he is again. He's been obviously out and about all day with his guys, and I'm just going to park my car and then we'll go and pick up Jill, and from there we'll probably duck into town to grab some dinner, and that'll be it for the day.